The contractions hit earlier than anyone expected. I remember looking at the clock in my small Denver apartment, my hands trembling as I reached for my hospital bag. It was too soon. My baby wasn't supposed to be here yet, but my body didn't care about schedules. By the time I reached the hospital, the staff was already rushing me through the bright double doors, the echo of wheels and hurried footsteps surrounding me. Monitors beeped in erratic rhythm, doctors and nurses exchanged clipped phrases I couldn't fully understand, and I was quickly stripped of control and dressed in a hospital gown. Panic filled every corner of the room. My breath came shallow, my heart galloped, and yet in the middle of all that chaos, my first thought wasn't medical. It was personal. Where were my parents? Where was the family I'd always carried in my heart, the ones I thought would rally in my worst moments? With one free hand, I grabbed my phone and opened the family group chat. My fingers shook so hard it was hard to type, but I managed to tap out the message. In the hospital, baby's early. Please pray. My eyes fixed on the screen as if my life depended on the little gray bubbles appearing. Surely someone would come. Surely my parents would leave everything and show up. That was the expectation, the faith I still held like a fragile thread. The reply came quickly, just not the one I imagined. A notification blinked on my screen. I opened it with my pulse roaring in my ears, only to see a message from my mother. Busy in Bali. Pray yourself. I stared at those words, blinking in disbelief. For a second I thought maybe it was a joke, or that I was hallucinating under stress. But it wasn't. That was their response. The cruelest blows don't always come from anger. Sometimes they come from indifference. It was as if they'd slammed a door in my face with a smile. At that moment, a thought cut through me like glass. Family's supposed to show up, not show off. The silence after that message screamed louder than the machines around me. The beeping heart monitor, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the rustle of paperwork, none of it compared to the deafening absence of love in that moment. Hours later, after a whirlwind of procedures, my daughter was placed in the NICU. She was tiny, fragile, her body dwarfed by the machines surrounding her. Clear tubes taped to her skin, wires crossing her chest, a ventilator rhythmically hissing. The doctor leaned close to me, his voice firm but kind. She's small, but she's fighting. We're doing everything we can. I nodded, clutching the edge of the plastic incubator. My palms left faint smudges on the glass. Through that barrier, I saw her chest rise and fall, so slight it was almost invisible. My heart split wide open in both love and fear. I took a chair beside her, the hard plastic digging into my back. I stared through the glass, my body aching, mind whirling. In that sterile room filled with machines, I turned to look at the waiting area outside. Rows of chairs sat empty. The space where family should have been crowded, whispering prayers, was deserted. A nurse with gentle eyes came by and asked quietly, "No family with you tonight?" Her question stabbed deeper than any scalpel. I forced a small shake of my head, words caught in my throat. She gave me a sympathetic smile, adjusted the blanket around my baby, and walked away. That contrast seared into me, strangers showing more compassion than my own blood. I sat there, hearing echoes of my childhood, being the youngest, always overlooked, always told I was too sensitive. Memories flooded back, being dismissed at dinner tables, laughed at for crying, told to toughen up. Staring at my baby's translucent skin, veins showing beneath like fragile blue threads, I heard those echoes louder than ever. It was then that Maya Angelou's words surfaced in my memory. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. My parents had shown me countless times before. I just never wanted to believe it. Maybe their absence wasn't an accident. Maybe it was the truest reflection of how they saw me, dispensable. I lowered my forehead against the incubator glass, whispering to the tiny girl inside. "You won't grow up invisible, not like me. I'll make sure of that." The thought both terrified and strengthened me. Realization settled like a heavy stone in my chest. I might be completely alone in this fight. Yet, if I had to carry it alone, I would. As the hours slipped into night, the NICU dimmed. Machines hummed steadily, their green lights pulsing in rhythm with my daughter's fragile breaths. The world outside grew quieter, until all that was left was the steady mechanical lullaby of survival. I looked at my phone lying face down beside me on the chair. No new messages. And no missed calls. Just silence. I reached through the small port in the incubator wall and brushed the tip of my finger against my daughter's minuscule hand. Her skin was warm, impossibly delicate. Tears slid down my face, not from despair, but from the vow taking shape inside me. "Don't worry," I whispered, steadying my voice. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." In that moment, it wasn't weakness I felt. It was a promise, a kind of steel forming under the weight of abandonment. The camera of memory zoomed out on the scene. Me, sitting in a hard plastic chair, my daughter in her glass box, an ocean of silence stretching around us. What I didn't know then was that this silence would only grow louder, heavier, until it broke open into something far more devastating than a quiet room. The second morning in the hospital was quieter than the storm that had brought my daughter into the world. The sun leaked through the blinds, pale and cautious, as if even the day wasn't sure it should shine in a place where life and death hovered so close. Doctors walked their rounds, voices low but efficient, and nurses checked the wires that kept my daughter stable. I sat where I had sat the night before, in the same chair beside her incubator, a paper cup of cold coffee sweating in my hand. Her chest rose and fell under the tangle of tubes, each movement so small that I held my breath with hers. Numbers blinked on the monitor, a language of survival I was learning by heart. I opened my phone, hoping, just once, for a message that said, "We're coming." Instead, the notifications were all the same. Pharmacy reminders, an ad for groceries, silence from the people who should have been my anchor. Silence has a weight, heavier than the alarms echoing in the ward. I knew by then that quiet wasn't neutral, it was a verdict. I thought of something I once heard. Silence can be the loudest betrayal. Sitting in that hospital chair, I realized how true it was. I should have put the phone away, but I didn't. My finger brushed the screen again, desperate for proof that I still mattered to the people whose approval had always defined me. And that's when the image appeared. A bright notification from Instagram. I opened it without thinking, and there she was, my sister, Zarithia, glowing against the turquoise sea. The caption read, "Family first, Bali vibes, Shach, blessed." My throat tightened. There it was, for everyone to see, a polished version of family unity splashed across a screen for strangers to admire. Family first. While I sat on a plastic chair in a hospital gown that smelled of bleach, clutching my chest every time my baby's monitor beeped, they were toasting cocktails under palm trees. The irony burned hotter than anger. I compared the salt of antiseptic in my nose to the salt water glistening behind her smile. The plastic chair beneath me versus the lounge chairs lined neatly on the beach. The buzz of fluorescent lights against the golden glow of Bali sunsets. People say, comparison is the thief of joy. Theodore Roosevelt was right. But sitting there, I thought, comparison was also the thief of dignity. Seeing that post wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. To the world, we looked like the perfect family. To me, the truth was fluorescent-lit abandonment. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. Rage simmered in my chest, but I swallowed it. This wasn't the place to explode. My daughter needed calm, not chaos. I put the phone down, but the words "family first" seared into me, branded in betrayal. By midday, another message arrived, this time from a cousin. I opened it quickly, heart foolishly hoping. It was short. "Congrats, enjoy every moment." That was it. No question about her name. No, how much does she weigh? Or is she breathing on her own? Just a single sentence dressed in emojis. I read it 3 times, waiting for more, scrolling back to see if I had missed something. But that was the whole message. An emoji felt cheaper than silence. At least silence admitted to absence. Emojis pretended to care with the least possible effort. I remembered how often people sent empty phrases, "Let us know if you need anything," and then vanished when you did. It was what so many call performative support. In America, we see it everywhere. Casseroles delivered when it's convenient, sympathy posted online, the illusion of presence without the cost of showing up. I looked at my daughter through the incubator glass and thought, real love shows up. It doesn't need hashtags. It doesn't hide behind heart emojis. I leaned back, exhaustion pressing down, and let my mind drift backward. Maybe they had never really seen me. Maybe this wasn't new at all. As the youngest, I had always been called too dramatic. When I cried, they said I was overreacting. When I asked for help, they accused me of wanting attention. Those voices were so familiar they still echoed inside me, even here, even now. It hit me then. This wasn't an exception. This was the pattern. My absence at their vacation mattered less than their image of perfection. My presence in this hospital mattered less than their cocktails in Bali. And maybe it had always been that way. I turned my gaze to my daughter's tiny fists curling against the blanket. My vow rose silently inside me. You will not grow up invisible like I did. I will not let you be erased before you've even begun. The bitterness in my chest began to shift. It didn't soften. It sharpened, like glass hardening in fire. Determination filled the space where despair had been. They could post, caption, hashtag all they wanted, but I would no longer play the role they had written for me. As evening shadows stretched across the NICU floor, I put the phone down, its screen dark against the chair arm. I leaned closer to my daughter, my lips almost against the glass of her incubator. They'll regret teaching me how to stand alone, I whispered. The monitor light blinked steady, like a heartbeat marking time against the silence. Late afternoon light filtered through the blinds in the NICU, thin and pale, cutting across the machines that hummed their steady rhythm. A nurse walked over to me carrying a clipboard. She smiled kindly, but her tone was professional. We need to finalize the chart, she said, tapping the form. What's her name? I froze. My throat tightened as I glanced at the paper in her hand. The line where her name should be was still blank, just 3 words typed in sterile font. Baby girl, last name. That absence mocked me. My daughter had a name, one I had whispered into the quiet when she was still inside me, one I had rolled on my tongue for months. But here, on the most official record of her fragile existence, she was nobody. What cut deeper was that in all the messages, scattered, half-hearted, perfunctory, not a single person in my family had asked what we'd named her. Not my parents, not my siblings. They had room in their lives for hashtags, sunsets, poolside drinks, but no space for the word that would mark her place in this world. I felt heat crawl up my neck, humiliation laced with fury. To be named is to be seen, I thought, and they hadn't even bothered to see her. I pressed the pen to the form, my hand steadying as I wrote it down. My daughter would not stay nameless, not in this ward, not in this family, not anywhere. If they refused to honor her, I would do it 1,000 times over. The nurse nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. She'll be proud of that someday. Her words lingered, soothing against the sharp sting of neglect. As the nurse walked away, my mind drifted backward. Dinner tables from years ago flashed in my memory, long stretches of chatter where I sat small at the end, trying to be heard. I would start to speak, only to be drowned out by louder voices. Sometimes my father would wave a hand and mutter, "Don't be dramatic," while my sisters rolled their eyes. I learned to bite my tongue, to let my words fade into the clink of cutlery. And now, staring at my baby's chest rise and fall beneath tubes and wires, I realized she was inheriting the same invisibility. That thought broke something in me. I leaned down close to the incubator, whispering her name, letting it fill the sterile space like a vow. You are real. You are here. You matter. Bitterness shifted into something sharper, more protective. The fire in me was no longer about what they denied me. It was about what I would never let them deny her. The buzzing of my phone yanked me out of my thoughts. A group video call notification lit up the screen. My parents' names flashed in bold. My heart leapt despite myself. Maybe, finally, they were ready to ask, to care. I accepted the call, screen glowing against my tired face. Their images filled it, sun-kissed, smiling, framed by ocean waves. My mother in a wide straw hat, my father raising a glass, laughter threading between them. "Sweetie," my mother's voice was bright, rehearsed. "You're strong. We'll celebrate when we're back." I blinked. "She's in the NICU," I said softly, my voice struggling to compete with the sound of waves crashing behind them. "She's only 3 pounds. My father interrupted with a wide grin. "Don't worry so much. Enjoy this moment. You'll laugh about it later." Their words landed like stones. Encouragement, they'd call it. But it was a performance, a script polished for the camera. It wasn't comfort. It was gaslighting, a way to erase the weight of what I carried by painting it as overreaction. I muted the call. On the screen, their laughter froze into silence. My eyes lifted from that glowing lie to the glowing monitors beside me. Beeps, hisses, blinking lights, all reminders that my reality was not a backdrop for their vacation smiles. This is the family brand, I thought bitterly. They celebrate the image, not the people. When the call ended, the quiet felt heavier than before. I set the phone down, the weight of it too much for my hand. I stared at my daughter again, her tiny fist twitching against the blanket. My breath steadied. I realized something that chilled and clarified me in equal measure. They were not coming back for me. They were not coming back for her. They would return only to reclaim the narrative, to restore their version of family, the one that cropped out anything inconvenient. People often mistake endurance for strength. I had done it myself, applauding my ability to survive neglect, telling myself it meant I was resilient. But true strength, I realized now, wasn't enduring. It was saying enough. I brushed a finger along the side of the incubator. "You will never have to beg for acknowledgement," I whispered. "Not while I breathe." The bitterness hardened into resolve. Their silence, their dismissal, their indifference. It was no longer my wound. It was my fuel. Night settled across the hospital. The hallway lights dimmed, the murmur of nurses softened, and the world outside the windows sank into darkness. I sat with my phone in my palm, its screen blank and cold. I whispered into the hush, steady and sharp. "The next time they see me, I won't be the one begging." The NICU monitor blinked, a steady green heartbeat against the silence. I didn't know then that the next time they called, it wouldn't be about acknowledgement. It would be about demands I would no longer grant. On the 5th morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. I had barely eaten more than a few bites in days, nerves and fear replacing hunger. That afternoon, a nurse came by carrying a tray. She set a steaming bowl of soup on the table next to me, the warmth immediately filling the sterile air. "You need strength too, not just her," she said gently, nodding toward my daughter in the incubator. I stared at the soup, humbled by the gesture. A stranger remembered what my own family had forgotten, that I was a person, not just a caretaker. My chest tightened, not from shame, but from gratitude. "It takes a village to raise a child," I murmured. "But where is my village?" The nurse patted my arm and went on with her rounds. I lifted the spoon, tasting broth rich and salty, and thought about how kindness so often arrives from unexpected places. Sometimes the people we expect the most from show up the least, and the people with no obligation at all step into the gap. For a moment, I let the warmth of the soup calm me, but the peace didn't last. A conversation carried through the hallway, 2 nurses speaking in hushed voices. "Her mother said not to worry," one whispered. "Apparently, it's nothing serious." The words made my stomach drop. I walked out of the lounge to the corner where they stood, pretending to check the bulletin board. My ears burned as I caught the rest. "She said her daughter was exaggerating," the other replied, "that she's fine." I froze. My mother had told relatives I was fine, that my premature labor, my baby struggling in a box of glass and wires, was nothing serious. I pulled out my phone and dialed. My hands shook with something more potent than fear. It was betrayal in its purest form. She answered with the casual lilt of someone who had been lounging by a pool. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you?" "How am I?" My voice cracked, then steadied. "You told people I'm fine, that it's nothing serious." Do you even know what's happening here? There was a pause. Then she sighed. I didn't want to ruin the trip. Stress is bad for your father. We needed this vacation. You'll manage, you always do. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. So my baby fighting to breathe is an inconvenience? Something you had to spin so people wouldn't worry? Her voice sharpened, defensive. Don't start with dramatics. You always blow things out of proportion. Her words were a blade. My crisis wasn't just ignored, it was reframed, repackaged as a nuisance, hidden like a family secret. Betrayal, I realized, isn't only absence. Sometimes it's rewriting the story to erase your pain. I hung up without another word. Sitting alone in the lounge, I replayed the call in my mind, anger pulsing through me. Childhood memories resurfaced with cutting clarity. I saw myself at 12, reporting to my mother that a teacher had mocked me in class. She had smiled stiffly and said, "Don't make a scene, just let it go." I remembered breaking my wrist in high school and being told I was milking it when I asked for help with chores. Over and over, my struggles had been minimized, covered with a layer of toxic positivity that dismissed reality. Now, staring at my baby through the incubator glass, I saw the pattern clearly. They didn't want truth. They wanted optics. They didn't want the discomfort of empathy. They wanted the convenience of pretending everything was fine. If you erase my suffering, I whispered, you erase me. And now, they were trying to erase her too. The bitterness sharpened into something stronger. I would not allow my daughter to inherit this cycle of silence. She would not grow up thinking her pain was a nuisance to be brushed aside. I leaned closer to the incubator and whispered, "You will never be hidden." True strength, I realized, is not enduring invisibility. It is naming betrayal out loud, refusing to collude in silence. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, an old saying echoed in my mind. Maybe that was my next step, not shielding their image anymore, but letting the light burn through it. I sat with that thought for a long time, considering what it would mean to stand apart, to stop covering, stop excusing, stop protecting the people who had abandoned me when I needed them most. As night descended and the hallways grew quieter, I drafted a message in my phone. The words were simple. You'll never hide me again. I didn't send it. Not yet. I stared at the glow of the exit sign at the end of the hall, red against the dim corridor, because I knew the next message from them wouldn't be about me or her. It would be about what they wanted, as if 31 days of silence had never happened. 31 days. That was how long it had been since my daughter was born. 31 mornings of cafeteria coffee gone cold before I finished it. 31 nights of folding myself into a chair beside her incubator. I had learned the rhythms of this place. When the lights dimmed, when the nurses traded shifts, which vending machine always ate your dollar. I had pictures of her on my phone, documenting the small victories, her chest rising stronger, her fingers wrapping tighter around mine, her weight creeping from 2 pounds upward ounce by ounce. But what I didn't have were visitors. Not one familiar face had walked through those automatic doors in a month. No flowers, no balloons, no one asking if I was sleeping or eating or surviving. I'd reached the point where even my disappointment had dulled into something like acceptance. If love was ever coming, it would have come by now. That was the thought sitting heavy in me when my phone began to buzz on the cafeteria table. First one notification, then another, then a cascade. The screen lit up so often it almost glowed. I picked it up and froze. 100 messages, missed calls stacked in a column, group chat exploding. Then the video call rang through. My finger hovered above the screen before I finally pressed accept. Suddenly, every square was filled. My brother, my sisters, my mother's tear-streaked face, my father pale against a hospital bed somewhere else. Everyone crowded together as if they had always been united, as if they hadn't been absent for 31 days. My brother leaned forward, voice ragged. "You need to come home. Dad collapsed in the driveway. He's in critical condition. Mom can't handle this alone. We need you." Voices overlapped. My mother sobbing, "Please come, we're falling apart." What struck me was not what they said, but what they didn't. Not one question about the baby, not one word about me. It was as if those 31 days of silence had never happened, as if I had been nothing more than a pause button until their crisis began. I let them speak, the noise pouring through the tiny speaker, until I finally said, calm and flat, "I gave you 31 days of silence, and it suited you. Now my silence is inconvenient." The words seemed to rattle them more than if I'd shouted. I added dryly, "Funny how the phone only works one way." I ended the call without waiting for their reply. Moments later, my brother dialed again. I answered this time, his voice frantic. "Why aren't you moving? Why aren't you packing? He could die." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "I've been here for 31 days, alone, eating from vending machines, sleeping in a chair, watching my 2-pound daughter fight for every breath. Not one of you walked through the door." He was silent for a beat before the excuses started spilling. "We thought you didn't want visitors." "We didn't want to overwhelm you. We figured you'd reach out if it was really serious." Gaslighting, plain and simple, turning absence into a virtue, erasing neglect by rebranding it as respect. "You really believe that?" I asked, my tone even. He hesitated. "We were waiting for you to tell us it was urgent." I laughed, not bitter but incredulous. "Urgent? My baby was born 3 pounds too early, her body wrapped in wires. I sent a message. I spelled it out. 'We're in the NICU. Please pray.' And your response? Drinks on a beach, pictures of sunsets. Do you realize what that meant?" He faltered. "We didn't know." I cut him off. "You didn't want to know." That was when the pivot came, sharp as a knife. His voice hardened. "If you had been clearer, we would have been there. You should have told us how bad it was. You left us guessing." My mother's voice chimed in from the background, brittle and accusing. "You made it sound under control." How were we supposed to realize? The betrayal deepened, as if the knife twisted. Not only ignored, but now blamed for being ignored. My crisis repackaged as my fault. Americans know this tactic well. It's the sleight of hand that makes the victim into the guilty party. If you complain, you're dramatic. If you endure, you must not need help. Inside, something shifted. If they could twist silence into my fault, then I would break it with a truth they couldn't spin. I steadied my voice. "Listen carefully. I'm not leaving her. Not for you. Not for this. I am her mother, and she needs me more than you ever did." Shouting filled the line, my brother pleading, my mother wailing, voices layering into chaos. I didn't flinch. I simply placed the phone face down on the table. In the NICU upstairs, her monitor beeped steady, strong, a rhythm of defiance. And in that sound, I found my breaking point, not in despair, but in clarity. Their demand had been loud, but my refusal would be louder, written not in words, but in action. The cafeteria was buzzing with the faint hum of vending machines and the occasional clatter of trays, but most of the noise that night came from the phone on the table in front of me. It wouldn't stop vibrating. Message after message, call after call, piling up like a flood I had no interest in opening the gates for. I let it shake against the plastic surface until finally, with a deep breath, I pressed accept. My brother's voice exploded through the speaker before I could say a word. "Why aren't you here yet? Dad could die any minute. Mom is losing it. We need you now." His panic was raw, but what caught me wasn't the urgency. It was the absence of any question about me, or about the child whose life I'd been tethered to for 31 days. Not once had anyone asked, "How are you holding up? How's the baby?" Their demands were singular, clear, and selfish. I kept my tone calm, even. "I've been here for 31 days, alone." There was silence on the line, so I went on. "I've eaten from vending machines. I've slept in a folding chair every night. My daughter was born 2 pounds, wrapped in wires, and not a single one of you walked through those hospital doors." The quiet that followed cut sharper than their shouts. For once, my words seemed to strike deeper than yelling ever could. Then, almost on cue, the excuses began to tumble out. My sister's voice, hurried and defensive. "We thought you needed space." Another chimed in. "We didn't want to overwhelm you. We figured you'd call if you needed us." I closed my eyes and let the absurdity sink in. Space? Overwhelm? My newborn was fighting for air, and they had rebranded neglect as kindness. This is what Americans call repackaging silence, I muttered under my breath, turning absence into virtue. Their excuses rang hollow, rehearsed, like lines read from a script no one believed in. You can't erase absence with pretty words, I said sharply. You all disappeared, and now you want credit for not showing up? No, that won't work on me anymore. I ended the call, my hand steady as I placed the phone face down. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the cafeteria's flickering light above me, letting the weight of everything settle. Then I pulled the phone back toward me, opened the banking app, and scrolled through the familiar list of outgoing transfers: tuition support for my nephew, rent aid for my cousin, grocery money for my brother's family. Line after line, proof that I had held them up while they let me collapse. My thumb hovered for only a second before pressing cancel on each one. Tuition, canceled. Rent, canceled. Cash transfers, canceled. The screen flashed $0 pending transfers. A strange calm filled me, cold but certain. If silence is what they gave, silence is what they'll get. Financial silence. The irony almost made me laugh. You can't bite the hand that feeds you, especially if the hand stops feeding. I imagined the shock when the payments stopped rolling in. I could already hear the voicemails, the texts, the accusations that would come. But for once, I didn't flinch. Later that night, walking back through the hospital hallway, the linoleum cool under my shoes, I let the mix of emotions wash over me. Liberation twined with grief. Cutting cords that had once defined me wasn't easy, even when those cords had been strangling me. I remembered birthdays I had paid for when they forgot, bills I covered without being asked, the countless favors they piled onto my back while calling me dramatic when I dared to need anything. My daughter would inherit none of it. No chains of obligation, no silent sacrifices unacknowledged. I paused beside her incubator, her tiny chest rising in rhythm with the monitor. My voice softened but carried steel underneath. You won't carry what I carried. I'll make sure of that. Sometimes the strongest word you can say is no. And tonight, that word had become my lifeline. Before leaving for the family lounge, I slipped my phone into my bag and switched the ringer off. No more frantic demands piercing the quiet. From now on, every ounce of me went to her, not them. The NICU was dim, only the soft glow of monitors lighting the room. I leaned in close, watching her fingers twitch against the blanket, her heartbeat steady on the screen. Whispering, I made my vow. From now on, every ounce goes to you, not them. What I didn't know then was that my silence, finally chosen and deliberate, would drive them louder. Desperate. Ugly. The call came from the bank just after evening rounds. I was in the hallway outside the NICU, trying to catch my breath after another long day of watching numbers on a screen tell me whether my daughter would make it through the night. The phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered, thinking it might be another doctor. Hello, this is Ms. Harper? The voice asked, polite, practiced. Yes, I said cautiously. This is Wells Bank. I'm calling to confirm. You've recently stopped the transfers to your brother's account. He called in confused. He wanted us to check with you. For a moment, I didn't answer. My brother hadn't dared call me directly, but he hadn't wasted a second dragging outsiders into the mess. He had turned his entitlement into paperwork, into a phone call designed to embarrass me. Yes, I replied finally, my voice steady. I stopped them. Those payments are over. The banker hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my calmness. I see. Would you like us to set up a different arrangement? No, I said. There will be no more arrangements. When I ended the call, I stared down at the phone, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Even money had been my leash, and now that leash was gone, I remembered something I once heard. When you stop feeding dependency, you expose entitlement. And that's exactly what was happening. Cutting them off wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of their backlash. Later that same day, I overheard two nurses talking near the vending machine. Their voices were low, but the words carried enough for me to catch. Her family called earlier, one said. They said she's overreacting, making things sound worse than they are. The other nurse sighed. They said she's always been dramatic. I froze in the hallway, my back against the wall. My stomach twisted, my throat closing up. They had done it. They hadn't just abandoned me, they were spreading poison. Reshaping the story so that I wasn't a mother holding vigil over her premature baby. No, in their version, I was unstable, over-emotional, dramatic. A flash of childhood came rushing back. Being 12 years old, crying after being teased at school, only to hear my father mutter, "She's too sensitive." My sisters rolling their eyes, my mother dismissing me with, "Don't make everything such a big deal." And here it was again, recycled decades later. Only now the stakes were higher. Toxic families don't just abandon you, they rewrite you. They take your pain and redraw it until you look like the villain in your own story. Humiliation burned through me, my face hot even in the cold hallway. But instead of breaking me, the sting hardened something deep inside. I thought, if you don't control the story, someone else will, and I refused to let them own my truth anymore. The very next evening, my nephew showed up at the hospital. He was awkward, shuffling his feet, looking anywhere but directly at me. I welcomed him anyway, hoping maybe, just maybe, he had come because he cared. He stood by the incubator, peering in at his tiny cousin, then blurted out words that sliced sharper than anything else I'd heard. "Dad says you only paid our bills to feel important." I stared at him, the air gone from my lungs. He looked guilty the moment it left his lips. But he didn't take it back. The damage was already done. My brother had twisted every act of generosity into selfishness. My months of rent payments, my years of tuition checks, the endless ways I had carried his weight, they were now painted as manipulation, as vanity. I turned back to the incubator, blinking hard to keep my eyes clear. Betrayal layered itself over betrayal. It wasn't just my siblings anymore. Their children had absorbed the poison, repeating it as casually as playground gossip. It struck me then. This was legacy. Disdain passed down like inheritance, cruelty dressed up as truth. And unless I broke it, my daughter would grow up swimming in the same venom. The pain was sharp, but it crystallized into something pure, clarity. I couldn't save people who called my lifeline chains. I couldn't redeem a family that turned kindness into accusation. I walked out of the NICU that night and sat in the cafeteria, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. Humiliation no longer weakened me, it steeled me. I remembered a phrase I'd once heard. You can't drink poison and expect the other person to die. Their words were venom, but I wasn't about to swallow it. I made a decision in that quiet moment. I would not engage in defending myself. Let them gossip, let them lie, let them twist. My silence would be my weapon. And I knew, especially for those who had lived as long as I had, Americans over 60 understood the sting of gossip. But they also knew the satisfaction of truth eventually peeling through. This venom would not define me, it would define them. That night, as I prepared to leave the hospital, my phone lit up again. New messages, not apologies, never apologies, but threats disguised as obligations. You need to think of the family. You can't cut us off. You owe us. Don't be ungrateful. I slipped the phone into my bag, turned off the ringer, and whispered to myself, they don't realize they've already lost me. Because I knew what was coming next. The next gathering wouldn't be about love or reunion. It would be war, staged as a family meeting. The message arrived late at night, a group text with my siblings' names stacked on top like a courtroom summons. Family meeting. Phoenix, urgent. We need to hold the family together. The phrasing was sharp, calculated. Not an invitation, not a question, a command. I read it twice, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. For 31 days, silence had been their answer to my pleas. Now, when their own foundations were trembling, they wanted me under their roof. When silence didn't break me, they decided to drag me into their stage. I decided to go. Not out of obligation or hope for reconciliation. I went because I needed to see them without masks, to hear the truth spoken without filters, to witness the ugliness they had tried to disguise. Sometimes you don't attend to belong. You attend to see things unfiltered, to finally stop pretending. When I arrived at my parents' house in Phoenix, the desert heat pressed against my skin even at dusk. The living room had been staged like a courtroom. My father sat at the head of the long oak table, my mother beside him, stiff-backed, eyes sharp with unspoken accusation. My siblings lined the other side, each expression a mirror of practiced indignation. The air was heavy, judgment wrapped in the disguise of discussion. My mother started first, her tone brittle. "You've embarrassed us, Marvel. You've divided this family. We raised you better than this." My father leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Do you realize what you've done? The chaos, the whispers? This isn't how family behaves." And then, the knife. His voice, low and cutting. "You were just an accident we carried along." The words slammed into me, erasing not only me but the child I had been fighting for day and night. It was more than dismissal. It was deletion. I felt the humiliation sear through me, but even as it burned, something steadied inside. The clarity was sharp. This was who they were. This was what they had always thought, and they were careless enough now to say it aloud. There's an old American saying, "Blood may be thicker than water, but it can also drown you." Sitting there, I knew exactly what it meant. Before I could respond, my sister Zarithia leaned forward, her voice dripping venom. "You've never really been part of us. You like playing the victim. That's what you've always done." The others nodded, piling on, their unity built on tearing me down. My brother muttered, "She thinks she's better than us, cutting us off." Another sibling whispered agreement, eager to align themselves with power. A flood of memories hit me. The countless times I had been scapegoated, the youngest always made the easy target. Every mistake laid at my feet. Every silence turned into guilt. Betrayal from siblings stings differently. It's the cut that says, "We were never on your side." And in that moment, I realized their unity had never been about love. It depended entirely on my exclusion. Their bond was built on my absence, not my presence. The humiliation twisted into rage, but rage that came with sharp empowerment. The truth stood clearer than ever, undeniable, irreversible. I didn't scream, I didn't argue. When I spoke, my voice was calm, deliberate. "You're right, I was an accident. But accidents change everything." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Their faces shifted, confusion mingling with shock. They expected me to beg, to cry, to collapse under their words. Instead, I dismantled their script. Inside, my thoughts sharpened. They expected me to kneel. Instead, I stood. Elie Wiesel's words surfaced in my mind. "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference." That's what I saw in their faces, not passion, not even hatred, just the cold absence of care. And in that moment, I stopped needing them to define me. I no longer belonged to their story. I defined myself, and for the first time, I felt free of their grip. I pushed my chair back. The scrape against the floor echoed like a gavel. My siblings muttered, unsettled by the control I seized simply by standing. As I walked out, the house behind me filled with noise, arguments, whispers, the collapse of their carefully constructed image. What they didn't know, what they couldn't yet imagine, was that their empire of entitlement was already crumbling, because the shares, the power they thought they held, were no longer theirs to claim. The living room was silent after my exit line, the sting of my words hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. I didn't move from my chair right away. I watched them, watched the way their shoulders stiffened, the way their eyes darted at one another as if someone else might take the blame for what had just been spoken. Anger lingered in that room like a smell that couldn't be scrubbed out. Finally, my father broke the silence. He straightened, his hand tapping the table like a gavel. "Enough of this nonsense. We'll settle it with the company shares. That will put things back in order." My siblings nodded, clinging to the illusion of control. My mother folded her hands tightly in her lap, her lips a thin line. They were convinced they still had the power, convinced that the structure of inheritance, of assets, of paper would override my defiance. I stayed silent, letting their confidence grow fat and comfortable before I slid it open. Sometimes you let arrogance build, so the fall hurts worse. When the murmurs of agreement filled the room, I slid a folder across the table. You might want to read this before you keep planning. They looked confused, my brother grabbing it first, flipping through the pages. His face drained of color. He passed it to my father, who read the first line aloud, disbelief in every syllable. Transfer of shares, into trust, beneficiary, Riley Harper. My daughter's name rang out in that suffocating room like a bell of freedom. Their voices exploded at once. What is this? You had no right! This is forged! I sat still, watching their entitlement unravel, strand by strand. It's not forged. Weeks ago, I set up a trust for my daughter. Everything that was tied to me is tied to her now. Your power, your safety net, is gone. Faces turned pale. Some shouted, others fell silent, their minds scrambling for a way to spin it. You stole from us, my sister hissed. No, I replied, voice calm. I reclaimed what was already mine, and I gave it to the one person in this family who has done nothing but fight to live. You ignored me when she was born. You ignored both of us, but you won't erase her name the way you tried to erase mine. The satisfaction wasn't in yelling or in seeing them writhe. It was in the silence that followed, the crack of their entitlement dissolving. Money talks, I said, leaning back. But silence can bankrupt louder. Vindication settled in me, cold but real. Still, there was sorrow woven through it. Because this paperwork, this trust fund, this legal boundary, was what it took for them to notice me at all. I reached into my bag and pulled out something smaller, older, weaker than legal papers, a crumpled envelope. The letter I had written in the NICU during those endless nights, the one I never sent. I laid it on the table, the crease marks deep, the edges frayed from being folded and refolded. This was the first time I begged, I said. I wrote every detail, 31 days alone. I pleaded for someone to come, to sit with me. I carried it in my pocket for weeks. I couldn't bring myself to send it because I knew, deep down, you wouldn't read it. And I was right. You never opened the first cry for help. Now you get the consequences. No one touched it. The envelope sat like a body in the center of the table, accusing, undeniable. Humiliation had turned into evidence. My pain had become their guilt to carry. The silence cracked again, this time into chaos. My siblings turned on each other. You knew she was serious. Why didn't you call? Don't look at me. You're the one who said she was exaggerating. My mother's voice cut sharp. We all assumed she'd manage. My father slammed the folder shut, shouting over them, his authority slipping like sand through his hands. I stayed detached, watching the empire collapse. For years, I had been their glue. The fixer, the quiet one who smoothed edges, carried burdens, paid debts. Now, stripped of that glue, they were crumbling in real time. Families built on silence, I murmured, collapse under truth. And I felt it. I no longer stood as the powerless child, begging for recognition. I stood steady while they scrambled. Their shame filled the room like smoke, and I didn't need to breathe it anymore. I rose slowly, chair scraping against the wood floor, my movements deliberate. Their shouting dimmed for a moment, all eyes snapping to me. I placed the folder and the letter side by side on the table, then looked at each of them in turn. You ignored me when I begged, I said, voice cold but clear. Don't expect me to listen when you scream. And with that, I walked out, leaving the trust papers and the crumpled letter behind like tombstones. They thought this was about money, but the true cost, the one they weren't ready to face, was still coming. The house was still vibrating from the fight. Even after I'd laid the trust papers on the table and left my crumpled letter for them to choke on, the air in that living room felt like a storm that hadn't moved on. My family sat there stunned, their voices rising and crashing against each other, convinced they still held some kind of control. My father's voice cut through the mess, harsh and shaking. We'll fix this. We'll straighten it out with the company shares. That'll remind her where she stands. They clung to the illusion like it was oxygen, like repeating it could make it true. My siblings argued about who was supposed to manage what. My mother muttered about appearances, but none of them dared look me in the eye. I stayed composed. In my hand was a photo of Riley, her tiny face filling the screen of my phone. It was my anchor, the reminder that every breath she fought for was more powerful than their noise. Inside, I thought, they screamed because their entitlement died louder than my silence ever could. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to shout. The truth was already breaking them apart, piece by piece. Finally, when their shouting ebbed, I spoke. My words cut through like glass. Funny how I was invisible. Until the money wasn't. The room fell still. My father's jaw clenched. My sister's eyes darted away, and my brother shifted uncomfortably. For once, they didn't have a script ready. It was as if I had slapped them, not with a hand, but with words sharper than steel. The silence that followed was thick with humiliation. There's a saying I once heard. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the loudest power. That was me now. For years, I had been their scapegoat, the one who absorbed every accusation, every disappointment. That role burned to ash the moment I stopped playing it. Reclaiming dignity didn't come with fire. It came with calm defiance. That line, spoken in even tone, was the turning point. I wasn't begging. I wasn't defending. I was done. Days passed before the next blow came, this time not in person, but online. I was feeding Riley in the NICU when a notification flashed. My sister Zarithia had posted again. Another polished image, another caption dripping with hashtags about family love and staying united. But this time, the photo wasn't from a vacation. It was from the meeting, and I was missing, cropped out neatly, erased as if I hadn't been in the room at all. I stared at the screen, the irony pressing down like a weight. Their attempt to erase me publicly mirrored what they had always done in private. This time, though, they had handed me the proof themselves. They couldn't own the truth, I whispered to myself, so they edited it. To anyone scrolling, it looked like harmony, parents sitting proudly, siblings united. But to me, it was another erasure, another attempt to cut me from the narrative I refused to leave. I thought of so many elders I had spoken to over the years, people in their 60s and 70s who told me about their own families rewriting history, polishing stories, distorting legacies for the sake of image. This wasn't new. It was just my turn to see it up close. And here was the twist. I didn't feel crushed. I felt a strange, almost bitter satisfaction. Because cropping me out proved what I already knew. They were scrambling. They were desperate to protect their reputation, to cover cracks spreading faster than they could patch them. The comments began within hours. Where's Marvel? Didn't she attend? Wasn't she there? Why isn't she in the picture? The questions spread like sparks, lighting up the facade they'd built. Their lies unraveled, not because I exposed them, but because outsiders noticed the silence. Truth doesn't need defense. It exposes itself. I closed my eyes, remembering another phrase I'd once heard. Reputation is what people think you are. Character is what you are when the lights go out. And their lights were flickering fast. I didn't have to say a word. The cropped photo was my testimony. The world could see the emptiness they tried to hide, the cracks showing through the gloss. That night, I put my phone down face first on the table. My heart felt strangely light, almost weightless. I whispered into the quiet. They wanted me invisible. Now the world sees their emptiness instead. And I knew, with certainty, that the final blow wasn't about an online erasure. It was about the last door I would choose to close forever. I laid the suitcase flat on the bed and opened it wide. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty space, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment. Then I reached for the first item, a stack of tiny onesies folded neatly, pinks and whites and soft cotton. Each outfit I placed inside felt like closing a chapter. Bottles, blankets, the paperwork the hospital had given me, all went in with care. I tucked the birth certificate on top, right above her first hat from the NICU. It wasn't frantic packing, no racing to escape. It was deliberate. Each folded item was an act of release, a message to myself. We were not running, We were choosing peace over war. Sometimes leaving isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. Many people in their 60s will tell you the hardest part isn't holding on. It's walking away when holding on only poisons you. I wasn't begging anymore. I wasn't chasing belonging in a place that had decided I was disposable. By the time the suitcase was zipped, my decision was ironclad. The weight wasn't just fabric and bottles, it was my new life taking shape. Denver International Airport was crowded that morning, travelers rushing in every direction, screens flashing with departures. I moved through the chaos quietly, a rolling suitcase behind me and my daughter strapped against my chest in her carrier. No dramatic farewell, no relatives waving from the gate, just me, her, and the steady rhythm of my footsteps. The finality of it wasn't in tears, but in silence. The contrast played in my mind. Their living room back in Phoenix erupting in chaos, voices clashing, accusations flying. And here I was, calm, controlled, walking away without looking back. They wanted me invisible, I thought as I shifted the carrier gently against my chest. So I gave them their wish. I paused near security, pulled out my ID, and caught my reflection in the plexiglass divider. Tired eyes, yes, but steady, clear. And stronger than I'd felt in years. Sometimes the door closes not with a slam, but with a whisper. That's what this moment felt like. The flight was smooth, and hours later the Colorado mountains greeted me with a chill that cut straight through the thin jacket I wore. I drove west until the air thinned, until the peaks rose tall against the horizon. My new home was a cabin, small, wooden, set against a ridge. When I carried Riley inside, the air smelled of pine and cold stone. The space was humble, but it felt cleaner than anything I'd left behind. A neighbor waved from across the dirt road, a smile easy, unforced. Strangers here offered more warmth in one moment than my family had in years. That night, Riley slept peacefully in a crib for the first time outside the NICU. No wires, no alarms, just the rhythm of her breathing against the hush of mountain air. Real family, I realized, isn't built on bloodlines or performance. It's built on presence. On showing up when it matters. I remembered a quote I'd once read, "Home is not where you come from, it's where you are wanted." And here, even in this modest cabin, I felt wanted, not by them, but by the life I was building. Hope began to edge out bitterness. I sat on the porch in the days that followed, holding Riley close while watching the sun sink behind jagged peaks. The air bit at my skin, but it felt like a baptism, a cleansing of everything I had carried. I reflected on the lessons etched into me. Silence had taught me who they were, but more importantly, it had taught me who I would never be again. Strength isn't always in confrontation. Sometimes, strength is in choosing yourself, even when the cost is high. I thought of the suitcase exit. It wasn't running away, it was running toward a life worth living. Grief still lingered, yes, but liberation towered over it. I bent my head toward Riley's soft hair and whispered, "You will grow up knowing you were wanted." Always. That vow rooted itself deeper than anything I had ever promised. The porch boards creaked under my chair as dawn approached one morning. I wrapped her in a blanket and stepped outside. The horizon glowed pink, then gold, then blinding white as the sun rose. I whispered into the mountain air, "This is our new inheritance. Freedom." Even as I embraced that peace, I didn't know one last voice from the past was about to find me, and it would change everything again. Mornings in the cabin began with a kind of quiet I had never known before. The mountains stood like guardians outside my window, capped in snow, their shadows stretching long and certain. The air was crisp, filling my lungs with something that felt close to healing. Riley cooed softly in her crib, a sound brighter than any symphony. I carried her to the porch, the wood cool beneath my feet, and watched the first light spill across the horizon. Peace, I learned, isn't the absence of conflict. It's choosing who you allow near you, choosing whose voices get to shape your days. For so long, I had let theirs dictate my worth. Now the only sound I cared to hear was the steady breath of the child in my arms. Sometimes peace is the loudest revenge. I wasn't raging, I wasn't shouting, I was quiet. And in that quiet, I felt more powerful than ever. The serenity here was earned, not given. And because it was earned, it was unshakable. A week into this new life, the phone rang. I nearly ignored it. Most calls from that world belonged to chaos, but the name on the screen stilled me. Daxwell, my old friend, the lawyer who had helped me through the legal transfer. His voice was steady. "It's done," he said. "The trust fund is airtight, untouchable. No court, no sibling, no parent can overturn it. Riley's future is protected." I exhaled slowly, tension I didn't realize I still carried loosening from my shoulders. He continued, "I sent the final documents electronically. It's all permanent now. They can fight in circles, but the papers don't lie." "They thought money was their weapon," I murmured. "Now it's her shield." The satisfaction wasn't the wild rush of victory, but something quieter, deeper. Knowing that the very thing they had used to control me had become my daughter's security. Financial independence had turned into emotional independence. I no longer needed to justify myself, no longer needed to explain why I cut them off. The ledger told the story now. The numbers bore witness to what they lost. That evening, as the wind whipped through the pines, another call came. My first instinct was to let it ring out, but when I saw the name, Osric, my grandfather, I answered. His voice was thinner than I remembered, worn with age, but steady. "I've heard," he said simply. "I know what happened." I braced myself, expecting another lecture, another plea for me to be the bigger person. But instead, I heard words I had never heard from a blood relative before. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Take care of that little one." My throat closed, my eyes blurred. It wasn't an apology I needed, it was recognition. And it came in the only form that mattered. One voice of truth outweighs a chorus of lies. I thought of all the things I'd endured, the silence, the gaslighting, the erasure. And then I thought of this voice, frail but honest, cutting through the noise. The tears that came weren't of grief anymore. And they were of pride. Days later, I noticed my family still posting curated images online, still pretending unity, still fielding questions about the missing shares. Friends and distant relatives asked, "Where's Marvell? Why isn't she in the photos?" Lies spilled from them like water, but the cracks were too deep to plaster over. I didn't engage. Silence remained my weapon, because the truest revenge was never shouting. It was living so well that their absence became irrelevant. I no longer measured my life by what they denied me. Success is the best revenge, they say, but I found it wasn't revenge at all. It was freedom. I closed the metaphorical door forever that week. No return, no second chances, no explanations owed. One morning, with Riley nestled against my chest, I stood again on the porch. The dawn painted the sky in strokes of pink and gold, the air biting and pure. I whispered into her hair, "You'll inherit love, not silence. Freedom, not chains." The camera of memory pulls back here. The cabin small but steadfast, the mountains vast, the horizon endless. And that was the last time they mistook my silence for weakness. This is the end of my story with them, but the beginning of hers, built not on their legacy, but on my courage.